Those are the countries that have legalized cannabis. None of them in Africa have done that. If you look at Europe, the green cannabis is legalized. In fact, for most of all of Europe, cannabis is legalized. They even have what we call cannabis social clubs, I think in Italy, in the Netherlands, where people would sit in a bar, cannabis bar, smoke cannabis socially. Because they've, I think, developed and matured and gone over what we are worried about, the recreational use of cannabis. If cannabis recreational use, or if cannabis as a plant as a whole was that bad, why is the Netherlands not having such a high crime rate where they have legalized cannabis? Why are these countries in Europe not having such a bad crime rate where they have legalized cannabis? Why are we linking up our problems of crime and violence to something that we actually may not have enough facts of? Okay, what are we doing at the University of the Free State? I'll try to be fast now. What I've told you, I always say to the students and my students that forgive me, I think, if I'm going to use this anecdote, that I'm like Thomas, the Thomas in the Bible, who said, Jesus, is that really you? Come here, I really want to fill those holes where they nailed you. I'm like that. I grew up in a system where we use traditional medicine. I've used traditional medicine. But I still have a question. Does it really work? That's why I'm Thomas. So I need to go and retest it in a controlled environment. I always say to traditional healers, you come and they say, I have this product, I know it works, and I want you to test it. But then I said, you can't tell me because you have no control of your patients. People come to you because they're desperate, you give them something, and then they meet Ali in Cape Town. Ali says, I've got a brother-in-law who can help you with that. You go there because you're desperate, and then Vanessa calls you from Pretoria saying, oh, there's another someone here in Pretoria, we heard that they are very good. By the time you find relief, you actually don't know who cured you. You don't. So let's do it in a controlled way. So the facts that I've given you, I like this quote because we gave you a whole lot of facts. Science is built up of facts. A house is built up of stones. But a collection of facts is not science. A collection or a heap of bricks is not a house. So we need to build the science around those facts. I put up this thing because there's another quote that I want to share with you. It's from Einstein. Einstein says, the world is a dangerous place to live. Not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who do nothing about it. The educated, the knowledgeable, the ones who have and the ones that are willing cannot sit and start criticizing traditional medicines, indigenous knowledge systems, cannabis, and do nothing about it. So we stand up and say, fine, let us go and do something about it. This is a resolution from the World Health Assembly of the WHO some years ago, where they were saying traditional medicines needs to be given a chance. The resolution says, before we can either reject or we can accept traditional medicine and traditional medicinal products into our health systems or into our policies, they must be researched. That's what the resolution said many, many years ago. And I think we want to do the same and say, give those academics who are into traditional medicines research the chance to research this, whether it is preclinical work, whether it is clinical research, let them prove it. And I always say, give them the chance to prove it in the same methodologies that you believe in. Now, if you have a skeptic, you don't come up with something that comes from mass to convince them. You need to convince them in the same systems that they are using so that they begin to understand you. Okay, so give traditional medicines a chance and give it a chance, a fair chance for it to be researched and researched well. Don't stop it. Okay, that was that resolution. Really getting worried now. But Ali, is it because you are sitting in front here? What we have done, I think, at the University of the Free State was then to come up with a research program. And some of the things that we are looking at is to look at cannabis and research cannabis on 3 aspects or 4 aspects. One, on its claims for cancer, diabetes, thank you so much, hypertension, and then we're also looking at Alzheimer's disease. So these are the current projects that are running at the University of the Free State. But also, you need then to say, what am I dealing with? So we have the analytical, I think, aspect where we isolate, we purify, and try and work out the ratios of these cannabinoids. It's a long-term project that we're doing because we believe that these cannabinoids balance themselves out. Then with the Department of Agriculture is then to look at the local strains of cannabis. And I'll explain why we're looking at the strain that comes from Lesotho and the strain that comes from the Eastern Cape in the Pondoland area. I'll explain why we're looking at those and look at how we begin to do genetic studies and do interbreeding of those. So a lot of people would come from Europe, come from everywhere and say, we have our strain, we want to come and cultivate our strain. I took up a stance and say, why don't we research our own cannabis? This is some of the publications that we have done, I think, between last year and this year on cannabis. I just put up on cannabis. At the Medical Research Council, I think there was a workshop, that was done when the cannabis aspect, came up. And there was, I think, a sort of a review that was done by the Alcohol, Tobacco, and other drug research unit on Professor Charles Perry. And what they found out about cannabis was the review identified, this is what I'm reading, the review identified moderate quality evidence to support the use of medicinal cannabis for chronic pain, chemotherapy-induced nausea, vomiting, multiple sclerosis. This was 2016 when they wrote that at the Medical Research Council in South Africa. And then I think at the bottom, I'll just quote again what they said, we owe it to our patients to offer the best relief of suffering with all available therapies. That's what they said. And they published that. What did we do? This is one of the papers, I'll run through it. Here we obtained cannabis samples right through the world. I think it was Canada, Afghanistan, South Africa, Swaziland, Lesotho, and we tested them. For one thing, we were looking at their effect on breast cancer, but also trying to figure out the mechanism using your chem assay, where we wanted to see the effect of cannabis on vascular endothelial growth factor, because VEGF stimulates angiogenesis, blood vessel formation, And we know that that may be very good for gangrene and diabetes. It is bad for cancer and tumors. So if we could find things that would actually inhibit angiogenesis, that would be good. So we looked at that. And then the second thing that we did was then to screen all these things right through the world and said, you know, what is happening? What is the best? That's why I kept now saying I'll come back to the aspect of Pondoland and Lesotho. So we had samples from France, Czech Republic, Sweden, Canada, Dutch, everywhere, up until Afghanistan. And we tested those samples. In a quick map, this is roughly where we got all those samples. In that article, we found that the cannabis that came from the Pondoland in the Eastern Cape was better performing in terms of inhibiting your breast cancer in the MCF7 growth, and also it inhibited angiogenesis. It stopped vascularization. So we thought that was actually very good. Let us follow that one. That's our local strain. Similarly, the same from Lesotho. So our question was, if you look at the Eastern Cape, Lesotho, the Eastern Cape, are these the same plants? We don't know. And that's what we need to find out. So that's, I think, roughly a 24-hour sort of assay looking at the effect on breast cancer, and then looking at your IC50s, and then 48 hours, comparing that to your doxorubicin, we actually could see that there was an in vitro, killing of the breast cancer cells. Okay? Nitric oxide, scavenging, again, we wanted to say, can these things inhibit, nitric oxide? Because we know that nitric oxide, it's funny because that, I think, low doses, it would stimulate, I think, angiogenesis. So we wanted to inhibit it. So this was done in the same experiment. And then the second thing that we also did was to look at your MMP1, your matrix, proteins, because also they are involved in angiogenesis. So we wanted things that would actually inhibit all of those. Something that is cytotoxic to breast cancer cells, and that is going to inhibit nitric oxide and also your MMP1. And we found, in fact, that the local strains actually do all that. That's your chem assay, where we're looking at the development of vascularization in an egg cell, and you try to inhibit that. Then that's, I think, where cancer treatment is moving towards. Let's stop, I think, vascularization. You starve your tumors, from nutrients and oxygen by blocking up, your blood vessels to them. So in summary, then, I think that's when we found that the best performing strains out of all those came from the Eastern Cape and Lesotho. Just a conclusion on that, we did another, I think, publication in Natural Products Communications. Here, now we're looking at those two strains and trying to isolate and purify and repeat the experiments and see what we get. So we wanted to confirm whether indeed there is these cannabinoids and what they are. So what we then picked up here again was we could pick up your THC, we could pick up some of your CBDs, and that was good for us to say, at least now we know what cannabinoids are there. So we developed up that assay to quantify those cannabinoids. And the results again shows that there was indeed, inhibition of, your breast cells, cancer cell growth, in an in vitro system. We have not gone into clinical, but this gives us an indication that even though now we have purified these things, we can still see the effect we saw in an earlier study. Again, that's your angiogenesis, where you look at how then are we going to stop the development of those blood vessels that may be able to supply your tumors. So you want to have your tumor to die out of starvation of nutrients, out of starvation of your oxygen. So in the far, I think, left, those are your samples, I think, with your cannabis strains. can see there's no vascularization happening there. This is just another publication that we did. It was also very interesting for us to say, can we find now the relationship between breast cancer, diabetes, and the use of cannabis? So we wrote up, I think, that communication to look at how does interleukin-6 and your monoamine, oxidase, contribute to, I think, the killing of your breast cancer cells in people that may have diabetes. Some of the projects that we have, I think these are some of the student projects, PhDs and master students, was to look at your Alzheimer's using acetylcholinesterase, butyrylcholinesterase, and also looking at your beta secretase. And then we looked at drug resistance. We know that cancer drugs are becoming useless because of resistance, and we now looked at, can cannabis extracts reverse drug resistance in cancers? And I think, we've got one of the master students, in fact, she just, I think, got her results back from the external examiners. We have not shared that with her. And she got actually 2 examiners giving her distinctions. And then we look at, again, in terms of diabetes, cannabis, on the glucose uptake, cannabis on your growth differentiation factor 15, that is involved, I think, in diabetes, and your protein glycation. That's another project that we're busy doing it. And then also another diabetes project looking at inhibition of alpha glucosidase and your DPP4. And then the genetic studies, that's something that we're doing. And then there's another project that I didn't mention there, I don't know what happened, but it's a PhD project where we're looking at cannabis and post-operative pain management. Analysis, because we need to know what we are working on, so we have to develop up, an analytical method, for the cannabinoids and begin to understand what we are doing. So literally we are saying, we know all these things about cannabis, but if we cannot control what we're doing with cannabis, then most probably we don't know what we're doing. So that means power is nothing without control. These are some of the cannabinoids, I think, of interest. These are the most abundant, the most common cannabinoids, but remember, there are about 120 something cannabinoids in cannabis. So there's an analytical kit, that you can buy. It's called an alpha cat that uses thin layer chromatography. So you buy that kit, you can either buy 10, 50, or 100. Assay, it comes with everything, including your TLC plates, and then you can spot it, and then they give you also a standard where you can quantify the cannabinoids. That's that kit, and then that's sort of your fingerprint of what it would look like. And what you then do once you run your unknown, you can do it in cannabis plants, you can do it in your cannabis muffin, you can do it in your cannabis ice cream, you can do it anywhere. It will still give you the quantification and then the identification of your cannabinoids. Then that's something that we ran. Once you have run that, this is the standard that comes, and if you see that standard, it gives you sort of your concentrations. So you have your plate, and then you can actually mesh it up, and you can tell from your unknown sample roughly what is the concentration of that particular cannabinoid. I'll just rush. HPLC work, remember we have done it before, where we can actually now use HPLC. In this instance, we used a high resolution LCMS because we could also quantify that, develop that chromatogram for your cannabis extracts. It's very important. What we picked up was handling of your cannabis sample is very important. What we have seen here was, in fact, a deterioration and a shift in your retention time if cannabis is not stored properly. That's really the message that we are saying you need to know the right conditions to store up your cannabis. Those who do not want to be caught by the police, you can inactivate your cannabinoids. Okay? You can remove them. You can remove them by using sodium hypochlorite, and then they disappear. Okay? I'll run this quickly because I don't want you to see what I've written. But literally, if you use sodium hypochlorite, you have your sample there, equal volumes of sodium hypochlorite, and your cannabinoid samples totally deactivates your cannabinoids. You won't see them. I'm not so sure if you're going to do that when the police catch you and run quickly and get your blood, deactivate it, give it to the police. I don't know. What's the potential, for cannabis? We said all these things. We know now what the University of the Free State is doing. Somebody was asking me outside, how do you do? I said, we have the permit, but that permit does not talk to law enforcement, the police, does not talk to the prosecutor, does not talk to the police on the roadblock waiting for you. It's just a permit. So what we then did was we went to the provincial police department in the Free State. We explained, we gave them the project and said, please tell your guys on the streets they must not lock me up if they find me with cannabis. We did the same thing to the prosecutors, say if I get caught up on a Friday afternoon and someone wants to lock me up and it is almost Christmas time, I need to have a number to call so that you tell them that leave him alone. Okay? We did the same thing in Lesotho. Because unfortunately, Ali, you may get someone who does not understand and it is on a Friday and then they lock you up and talk to you on a Monday. You don't want that. Okay. So you have to go through all those processes. This I took it out, I think, is it Green Life or something? Where they were extrapolating the potential market size of cannabis between 2013 and 2021. If you look at the blue one, that's their minimum, 4.8 billion to about 6.8 billion. And this is on medical marijuana, cannabis. If you are interested then to say, what will be the value of medical marijuana plus the recreational marijuana? What's the value of that? Okay, it goes to about 37 billion US dollars. That's why maybe the Americans have legalized cannabis, making money out of it. Okay, so if you look at the biopharmaceutical company, globally, 1.5 billion people are pain sufferers. And if you translate that to some hard cash, it looks like the pharmaceutical companies would be making 500 billion US dollars. That's not me. This comes from the cannabis biotech pharma market, survey. So people see this potential. They see this benefit. Maybe Europe, that's why they legalized it. They see the potential. They have not been distracted by recreational use. What's the conclusion? I think there's a potential for Africa and the continent to begin to look at how do we formalize the development of a cannabis industry, regulate it like any other regulated, industry for medicinal purposes. If I have one plant or two plants that I'm allowed to grow at home, and I smoke that every day, does it really make any difference whether there is cannabis out there or there is no cannabis out there? If all of us all our neighbors, Ali and you, and we all plant cannabis in our neighborhood. All of us. You plant one of each, the law says so. And there's a community of about 100. So we'll have 100 plants. We'll smoke every month. So, makes a difference. But also we're saying, if we could develop this industry, we may be able to compete locally, globally. South Africa, I think when they started up their bioeconomy strategy, one of the things they said there was they are hoping and they want that South Africa should be in the top 5 countries with a pharmaceutical industry based on their bioeconomy. That has not happened. Many, many years ago, I'm going to retirement. It has not happened. What is the problem? Are we not having confidence enough in ourselves to do things? But also we are saying, let's do this research. Allow us to do this research so that the findings can help us influence the policy. If our findings say cannabis is bad, so let it be. If our findings say cannabis has a potential, so let the policy listen to science. Importantly, again, I think we want to give the South African science researchers an international perspective in terms of their medicinal plant research. We always say that South Africa is one of the top 5 countries with the most biodiverse. I think it's after Brazil, after some other countries, but we're doing nothing about it. I think in conclusion, time has passed where we begin to talk about how resources we have, the number of resources we have, and we do nothing about that. It's like our parents, when they were very happy, during my time. Parents were very happy that they have 10 children. Very happy. What do you do with those 10 children anyway? Very happy that I have cows, cattle, filling up the crop. What are you doing with those things? I think we need to move away from this resource-based thinking to a knowledge-based thinking. Thank you so much.